So there is no video course for this. So it is better that you listen to this and then study. And since I'm manually solving it, you cannot actually have any slides also that is available. So accept the questions. I'm manually trying to solve it. Okay. So let me share the slide, the questions, so that it makes it easy for you. Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going for a few theoretical questions and then try to understand from this perspective. There are given 4 statements, and we are trying to see which of these statement is actually true or false. So the first question is like raw data hazard could be reduced by operand forwarding. So we know that raw data hazard happens whenever there is a true data dependency between one instruction to another. So we will take each question one by one. So this is how raw data dependency has, and when operand forwarding, let's say when you have the instructions like this, what is being shown. So you have an add instruction, then sub, and then there is a data dependency between them. This is known as raw hazard. So all of them are ALU instruction. In that case, I can perform operand forwarding from the output of ALU to the input of ALU, and from output of mem stage to the output of ALU. That is what you can see. I can reduce. But we have already seen that when there is a load instruction followed by an add instruction and there exists a dependency between them, then we cannot completely eliminate stalls. We can reduce the stalls. So it happens only in the case of load and add. In all other cases, which only add instructions or load and store, any such combination, it is easy for us to completely eliminate data hazard. So the statement that is being, this is known as raw hazard. So the statement raw data hazard could be reduced by operand forwarding. That is true. Now, if the statement would have been raw data hazard can be eliminated by operand forwarding completely, that is wrong. We cannot eliminate except the case of a load followed by an ALU operation. Now, second question is a normal in-order 5-stage MIPS pipeline can achieve an IPC larger than 1. So what do you mean by this? So first is a 5-stage pipeline. That is what we have discussed over the last week. And the other one is known as in-order. So in-order means when I have instructions I1, I2, I3 like that. In-order means I will execute I1, then only I'll execute I2. So if by some reason I cannot execute I1, then everything after I1 is going to be stalled. They have to wait in pipeline. So the functional unit associated with instruction I2 as well as the operands both will be available, but still because I1 cannot get its operand or I1 is not having the corresponding functional unit that is free. Let us say I1 is a division operation, and if division unit is busy with some other instruction, then I1 would be stalled. Stalling of one instruction will lead to stalling of all the subsequent instructions. Then that is known as an in-order pipeline. So in order, I will execute all instructions in order, whereas the other category is known as out of order execution. So in that, even though I1 is waiting for getting a resource or waiting for an operand, as long as operand of I2 and I3 is available, I2 and I3 can overtake I1. But their control logic should be in such a way that it should not create to any hazard or any other consistency issue. So we are talking about a normal in order 5-stage pipeline. Which can achieve an IPC larger than 1. So this is how a normal in order instruction pipeline will look like. From you can see that every cycle one new instruction fetch is going to start. So only if the previous one reaches ID stage, then only the subsequent one reaches an IF stage. So this is called whoever starts first, they will complete first. Whoever have EX stage first, all others who started after them, let's say I plus 1 and I plus 2 started after I. So their execution stage will happen after the execution stage of the previous one. So this is how an in order 5-stage pipeline looks like. Now our question is, what is going to be the IPC of this? So IPC stands for instructions per clock cycle, number of instructions completed per clock cycle. So here if you look at, let us say the first instruction is going to complete at 5, second complete at 6, third complete at 7, fourth completing at 8 if there is no hazard. That is the ideal case. So what happens? Number of instructions that is completed. 4 instructions are completed and it took total of 8 clock cycles. So IPC, instructions per clock cycle, is going to be 0.5. Now if you continue this larger, let us say what happens to 100 instruction? 100th instruction is going to get over at 104th, sorry, first instruction will get over at 5, then 6, then 7, like that the 100th instruction will get over at 104. So it took how many instructions? 100 instructions are going to be completed at 104 clock cycles. That is what you are going to get. Similarly, let us consider 10,000 or 1 lakh instruction, and what is going to happen is this is the clock cycle, because the initial 5 seconds delay, that is overhead. So whatever you do using an in-order pipeline, the denominator would be always larger than the numerator. So the IPC value will be always less than or equal to 1. If it is going to be infinitely large number of instructions, then IPC value 10 to 1. So what is given in the question? A normal in-order 5-stage MIPS pipeline can achieve an IPC larger than 1. That statement is wrong. With a normal in-order pipeline, I could get at most IPC equal to 1. And IPC is called instructions per clock cycle. That is reciprocal of CPI, number of clock cycles required per instruction. So for a normal in-order processor, CPI is always greater than 1 and IPC is always less than 1. So second statement is false. Now coming to the third statement, for a MIPS instruction store R2 16 of R3, some contents stored in the ID EX pipeline register will bypass the EX unit directly to the EX mem pipeline register. So if you look at this, you can know that there is a store instruction, and what happens in store? This is going to be the effective address 16 plus content of R3, and that will be found out in the EX stage. So at the end of execution stage, I will have the effective address that is available. And what is this R2? This is the source register. So essentially, the content of R2 is to be returned to the memory location pointed by 16 and R3. So for a MIPS instruction store R2 16 of R3, some contents stored in its ID EX pipeline register will bypass the EX unit directly to the EX mem pipeline register. Let us look at the pipeline diagram. So this is the store instruction what we are talking about. Now, after the fetching of the store instruction, the binary coded or the fetched instruction would be available here. So the store R2 16 of R3 in its binary form would be available in IFID pipeline register. Now, after the decoding, it is going to read the register. So as part of the instruction, if any reading of the register required, that will be done in the register decode or the instruction decode and the register fetch stage. So here I have to read the content of R2, which is to be returned to the memory location, and I have to read the content of R3. So content of R2 and content of R3 is going to come into this, and then it will tell that it is a store operation. This much is going to be available. Now what happens here, and I know that this value 16 that is coming as an immediate displacement. So the 16 along with the content of R3 is going to be get added at value. So here you will be getting the effective address. But whatever you have read, the R2 value, which is already available, that is actually going into this. And this R2 is to be used because now we have the address, we have the data that is the content of R2, the address that is R3 plus 16. So the address is available. That's what you can see. And the data is available. So the data that is coming from this point, this is the way our data flows. So the content of R2 will come like this. The effective address will come like this, and then you are going to store into memory. This is essentially what happens. Now look at the question, what they are telling. For a MIPS instruction store, some content stored in ID EX pipeline register will bypass the EX unit directly. So there are some content which is available in this pipeline register will bypass through the ALU stage. That is exactly the content of R2, which we have here. The R2 content, which is already in IDEX pipeline register, will be copied as such to the EXMEM pipeline register. Whereas content 16 and R3, they will be used. So some contents is going to bypass. That is actually true. All the value that is available in this pipeline register is not processed in the execute unit. Some data is processed, whether the other data is simply copied down. So the third statement for a MIPS instruction store R2 16 of R3, some contents stored in its ID EX pipeline register will bypass the EX unit directly to the EXMEM pipeline register. That is also true. Now, the fourth one is a normal 5-stage in-order RISC pipeline without operand forwarding can have row and var hazards. So, row hazard and var hazard, that is what they are telling, both hazards. Okay. So, we know that if operand forwarding is not there, it can have row hazards. But whether operand forwarding is there or not, var hazards will not happen in the case of a normal 5-stage pipeline, because that will happen only in out-of-order pipeline and not in the case of a 5-stage. So the last statement, if you look at this, here you have row hazards that will be always available. This is known as a row hazard, a data that is written, that is being read. So it is read after write that happens. And here you have a data that is read. So you are going to read. These are the var hazards. So these var hazards, even though there exists like this, var hazard will never happen. Row hazard can happen. So the statement, a normal 5-stage in-order pipeline without operand forwarding can have row and var hazards. Var hazards will never happen. Row hazard can happen. So together that statement is wrong. So out of the 4 statements given, the first one and the third one is correct. So the choice, the answer is 1 and 2 only. These are the correct answer. Let me know if you have any query in this before I go to the next one. In the 4 statements given and how we have made the conclusion, if any student have any query, kindly raise your queries now, or else we'll move to the next question.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the calculation of instructions per cycle, that I plus 1, I plus 2, and I plus 3, and I plus 4, there were 5 instructions getting executed at the end of 8 cycles. Like, how did we get that 4? I wasn't able to understand.
Okay. Let me see whether I made a mistake there. At the end of the 8th clock cycle, if you see, only 4 of them are completed, no?
Why isn't I plus 4 completed? Like
It
at
is
the end
not,
of...
that will be completed only if it goes for write back stage. That will happen in the 9th clock cycle.
Oh, sorry, sir. It was my mistake.
So then it will be actually 5 by 9. Okay.
Yes, sir. Understood, sir.
Any other query?
Sir?
Yeah.
Can IPC be greater than 1 in out of order stage?
Yes, yes. That's possible. Not in simple out of order. There is a class called superscalar processor. So out of order and superscalar, which will, so simple scalar processor in order means every cycle I will fetch only 1 instruction. As long as I fetch 1 instruction per clock cycle, our IPC can never go larger than 1. So even if it is out of order, but I fetch only 1. So fetching is the initial bottleneck. When I fetch only 1 instruction per clock cycle, whatever you do later, essentially you can complete only 1 instruction per clock cycle. That means your IPC value can never exceed even though it's out of order. But there exists another category of processor known as superscalar, which will fetch more than 1, which we will learn in the next week. Any other query?
Sir,
Yeah.
once explain why there is no war hazard, sir.
Okay. So this war hazard question, let me take. Can you see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is been shown in the right hand side is the description of a war hazard. So war is something like write after read. So here what happens? I am going to write something into R3. When it will happen, it happens at clock cycle number Sorry, I'm going to read something from R3 that happens at clock cycle number 2. This first step. When I'm going to write into R3, that happens at clock cycle number 6. And I am going to read from R4 at clock cycle number 3. If you look at the pipeline, okay. And I'm going to write into R4 at clock cycle number 7 because it's the third instruction's write back stage. This is second instruction's write back stage. So this is the dependency. Something that is in read at 3, that location is overwritten at clock cycle number 7. It is not a hazard because it happens always after, because I'm following in order. So hazard means if I run it the assigned time slot, it creates to incorrect execution. So here it will not create any hazard at all. This is a scenario. There is a write after read, but it will not create any problem or stalling or incorrect execution. Whereas if you look at raw, here, when will I write to R1? I write into 5 at clock cycle number 5. When will I read this R1? At clock cycle number 3. This R1 means I am doing here at the ID stage of the second one. When I am doing this at clock cycle number 4. So I am going to read a value at clock cycle number 3, but actually the latest value should be available only at clock cycle number 5. This is a hazard because if I do the operation at the assigned time cycle, it leads to incorrect execution. So var is not a hazard. But if sub runs before add, then this becomes a problem in this case. But here, since I am going in order, then sub will never run before add. Did I clarify your query?
Yes, sir. Understood, sir.
Okay. Anything else? Then let us move to the next question. Yeah. Yes.
Sir,
yes, please.
but how should we correlate to the without operand forwarding that line? How should we correlate these two?
There is nothing specific. Even though, see, the problem is if you use operand forwarding, then and there is no load instruction, then there won't be any hazard at all. Even though, because we know that using operand forwarding, the hazard scenarios are taken care of, except load add. So that statement is given just to confuse the student. So then they may think whether operand, because it's an AND condition, raw and var is given. So whatever happened in the raw side, var will never happen. And var has no connection with respect to operand forwarding, but raw has some connection with operand forwarding. Let's say the question is whether it's only raw portion, the var portion is not mentioned in the statement. So without operand forwarding, obviously there is hazard. With operand forwarding, there is no hazard except load add case. Suppose if I am telling I have only ALU instruction, there is no load instruction, and I am telling there is operand forwarding, will there be raw hazard? Answer is no. Anything else?
No, sir. It's okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So let me go to the next question. So given a non-pipelined architecture running at 1.5 gigahertz that take 5 cycles to finish an instruction. So we have a non-pipelined architecture which is running at 1.5 gigahertz. That means the clock cycle time. How much is one clock cycle? That is governed by this. It will take 5 cycles to finish an instruction. Let us assume all instructions will take 5 clock cycles. And how much is one clock cycle? 1 divided by 1.5 gigahertz. Now you wanted to make it pipelined with 5 stages. I'm going to design a 5-stage pipeline due to hardware overhead because we have to add pipelines or registers in between. So due to hardware overhead, the pipeline design will operate only at 1 gigahertz. So I cannot go as fast as an unpipelined design because apart from the combinational logic that performs the fetching or decoding, I need to add an extra circuitry that is my interface registers, pipeline interface registers in between. So naturally, I can operate only little slower. So the pipeline register will operate only at 1 gigahertz. Now, 5% of memory instruction can cause a stall of 50 cycles. So memory instructions are those which are load and store instructions. So when it comes to the mem stage, 5% of memory instruction may not be present in the cache. So you have to go to main memory. That is why the reason doing mem 5% of memory instruction will cause a 50% or 50 cycles stall. 30% of branch instruction can cause a stall of 2 cycles. So this can be due to mispredicting the branch. Out of the branches, 30% of branches, I have to stall it. Maybe because I don't know what is the target, or by the time I come to know the outcome of a branch, I have wrongly brought something else. So that is 2 cycles stall. And load ALU, you know that if there is a load instruction and immediately after there is an ALU instruction, there is a stall of 1 cycle. So load ALU combination is going to stall for another 1 cycle. Assume that in a given program, there exists 20% of branch instruction, 30% of memory instruction, and 10% of instructions are load ALU combination. What is the speed up of the pipelined design over the unpipelined design? So you have to compare with an unpipelined design where each instruction will take 5 clock cycles plus what is 1 clock cycle time. So time to execute one instruction under the pipelined case, under the unpipelined case. And if you take a ratio of them, that is the speed up. So let us try to find CPI of the unpipelined. Cycles per instruction for the unpipelined is going to be 5. So I take 5 clock cycles to complete in an unpipelined design. So unpipelined design means 1.5 gigahertz. That means 0.67 nanosecond. 1 divided by 1.5 into 10 to the power of 9. So 0.67 nanosecond is my unpipelined clock speed. And pipelined clock speed is 1 gigahertz. That means it is 1 nanosecond. Now the execution time in the UP stands for unpipelined. That means CPI into clock cycle time. Each instruction will take 5 clock cycle, and 1 clock cycle is nothing but 0.66 or 67 nanosecond. So I will take roughly 3.33 nanosecond per instruction. So if I have 10,000 instruction, my execution time is going to be whatever is time to execute one instruction into instruction count. Okay. Now let us go to the pipeline design. So in a pipeline design, we know that ideally the CPI is going to be 1 because the program will be very low. Here the program size is not given. So ideally, pipeline design means each instruction will take only 1 cycle on an average. So it's known as base CPI. But there can be scenarios where there exist stalls. So base CPI, then I have to add how many cycles there. So it takes 1 clock cycle to complete an instruction normally. Wherever there is hazards or stalls, that many stalls I have to add. So the number of stalls that are happening due to 3 cases. One is memory stalls, whenever there is memory misses. Second one is branch stalls, what is given. And third one is load ALU combinations. So these are the stalls and the percentage and the fraction is given. So the stalls are of 3 types: memory stalls, branch stalls, and load and ALU stalls. So what is the base CPI? I tell that if in a pipeline design, if there is no stall at all, my average CPI is going to be 1 cycle per instruction. That is the ideal case in a pipeline. Now, when you look at memory stalls, I know that there are 30% memory instructions. Out of that, 5% of them will result in 50 cycle stall. So 0.3 into 0.05 into 50. Coming to branch, I have 20% of them are branch instructions. So let us see how much is the branch instruction that is being given. So there are 20% of instructions that are branches. Out of the branches, 30% of the branch only will incur a stall of 2 cycles. So this is 2 cycles. Now there are 10% of instructions that are load ALU combination, and they will have 1 cycle delay. So base CPI plus memory stalls plus branch stalls plus ALU stalls. So on an average, the cycles per instruction when you wanted to execute in a pipelined instruction is going to be 1.97. Now execution under the pipeline, so it's CPI into clock cycle time. So it takes 1.97 clock cycles per instructions on an average, and 1 clock cycle is 1 nanosecond because I am operating at 1 gigahertz. So I will take 1.97 nanoseconds per instruction. So the speed up is going to be time for executing one instruction, because I just going to assume in both the cases the instruction count is same. I'm going to run a huge program with 1 million instruction, so that 1 million will be there in numerator and denominator. So I can simply take a ratio. CPI of the unpipeline, that is 3.33 divided by CPI of the pipeline. So I will get a speed up of 1.69. So even though I run a slower clock, I am moving from 1.5 gigahertz to 1 gigahertz by pipeline, I am able to get 1.69 clock cycle. And there won't be any stall in this case of an unpipelined design. We have to assume that in the case of an unpipelined design, there was no stalls, because in the statement it is given for memory stalls are not going to happen. So that completes that. Any query in this? If any student has any query in the way how it is solved, please ask now, or else we'll move to the next question. We are now moving into the next question. It's pipeline hazards. Can you see the slide? Can someone respond? Can you see the pipelines of hazard slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So pipeline hazard, here it is given a program has 2000 instruction of the sequence load data, add data, or load double, add double. So load, add, that's a sequence. So I have 1000 load instructions. Immediately after each of these, I have another 1000 add instructions. So it's a load add combination in the interleaved manner. Now what's the peculiarity of the program? The add instruction depends on the load instruction right before it. So every add is dependent on the load. What does it mean? Load is going to get a data which is to be added. So I'm going to load a data from memory that is going to be added. And the load instruction depend on the add instruction right before it. What does it mean? So when I have an add instruction, let's say an add R2, R3 and R1, and then I'm going to write a load instruction which is dependent on them. So what I'm going to put is 8 of R2. So for address computation of load, whatever is the result that is generated by the add, that is dependent. So how will the next add would be? Whatever I'm loading here. So it's R5 and R1. So this is the dependency. Next load is going to be dependent on this. So when I'm going to perform the next load, what I'm going to tell is it will be, let's say 8 of R6. So this is the dependency. So each add in, so I am starting with a load. So what should be the load here? I should load into R3 and some 8 of R0. So this is the dependency between them. So this is the pattern in which this has been done. If the program is executed on a 5-stage pipeline, what would be the actual CPI with and without operand forwarding technique? So first we will study the case of without operand forwarding case. Now, if there is no operand forwarding and we know that there exists a dependency, then the nth instruction, whatever instruction, it can have the ID. ID is a stage where I have to read the operand. The ID of the nth instruction can be only after WB of the n-1th instruction. Let us look like this. This is a sequence, load, add and all. So I am going to write the result only here. So my W back, the write back happens at 5, and that is the result which I am going to use. So there is no operand forwarding. So add instruction can read its operand. Since there is no operand forwarding, this result has to be written to some registers, and it is from that register I have to. So at the end of clock cycle 5, the register is updated. The clock cycle 6, if I performs the ID, then only I can read it. So this is the way how it is completing. Now similarly, this load can start only at 10. That is what it is told. The ID of the nth instruction can be kept only after the WB of the n-1th instruction. So the ID of second instruction can happen only after the WB of the first instruction. Like that it is going to. So with this we come to know that wherever it is marked, first instruction getting over at 5, second getting over at 9, third getting over at 11, like that. There are 2000 instructions, third getting over at 13. So if you look at that, you can know that each instruction there are 3 stalls. And if you continue, the instructions reach the clock back stage, the write back stage at clock cycles 5, 9, 13, 17, 21, 29, etc. This is an arithmetic progression. So the last instruction, which basically an add, first instruction is load, second is add, like that. The last add instruction will reach the write back stage at first time followed by this. So it is like 8001 clock cycle. So the CPI is going to be, it took 8001 clock cycles to complete 2000 instructions. So my CPI is basically 4. It can also be divided as base CPI is 1 plus there is a stall of 3. So 1 plus 3, I can tell the CPI of 4 also. Since it is, I am very specifically talking about 2000 instructions, that is why it's 00005. If I take very large number of instructions, it will tend to the value 0. So either it can be computed like this, or you can tell each instruction has 3 stalls. So base CPI is 1 That means every cycle I should complete one instruction plus extra stalls, how much it is there. Is this clear? Before I go to the next slide where I'll talk about how operand forwarding based technique is being done. So anybody has any doubt in how did we compute the CPI for a case without operand forwarding? So you have to understand the meaning of the question. What is a dependency? Add depend on load, load depend on add, like that. So any query, anyone? Now we move to the same question. What if I could have done operand forwarding? So with operand forwarding, we know that even if you do every add after load, so we know the sequence, it is load, add, load, like that. When an ALU instruction comes immediately after a load, there is a one cycle stall. But and load coming after add, there is no stall at all. So accordingly, we have to see why there is no stall. But load after add do not have a stall. So look at the first instruction. I am going to have my value available at the end of the mem stage only. And by operand forwarding, I don't want the value at ID. I can get the value at EX stage also. So this is how operand forwarding works. But there is already one cycle stall that I am going to do. So the ID can be here also. There is no problem in ID, but this has to be a stall. Your ID can be either clock cycle 3 or clock cycle 4. Whatever it is, execute can happen only at clock cycle 5. EX stage of the add instruction can only be after mem stage of the load instruction. So there exists a stall for an add instruction. So what happens for a load? Since there is one cycle of stall, I can start the fetching only here. I perform decoding. At the end of EX stage, I have the result available. And that result is to be used by my load instruction because that result is to be, so how the dependency come? If I take the instruction, my add instruction is telling add R5, 8 of R2. Now the load instruction is going to be dependent on that. So load I am telling, so sorry, this is add instruction. So let me correct it. So my add instruction is add R2, R3 and R4. And my load instruction is going to be dependent on this add. That means R5 is the destination. So 8 of R2. So as and when this R2 value will be available. So the result of R3 plus R4 would be available at the end of EX. And I require this 8 and R2 to be added at the beginning of EX. So it's an EX to EX forwarding. So with operand forwarding, there is no stall at all. So stall instruction, this load instruction do not have a stall, whereas add instruction will have one stall each. So if you look at the same pattern, instruction reach WB, first one at 5, I will complete my first load. Then there is a one cycle delay. Rather than at 6, at 7 only I complete my add instruction. Immediately after that, the next load will complete at 8. Immediately after that, at 9, there is no instruction completing. So all the red color indicates by what clock cycles loads are getting over, and blue color indicates at which clock cycle stores are getting over. So if you look at that, sorry, not store, ALU instruction. The last instruction is an add instruction. So first add instruction is completing at clock cycle number 7. And between this add instruction, there is a common difference of 3, 7, 10, 13. So there are another 999 add instructions more. So that makes it total of 3004. Or if you have 2000 instruction, what is the base CPI? Base CPI is 1. How many stalls per instruction? I have one stall in every 2 instructions. That means per instruction I have 0.5. So it is 1.0, 1.5 is going to be my CPI. How do you get it from the same equation? CPI is going to be total, it is 3000 divided by 2000 instructions. So it's going to be 1.502. This is the way how you find it out. So either you can solve out to this, or if you're able to find out when stall happens and break down the number of stalls per clock cycle, I can bring it down to base CPI plus stall CPI. So CPI is number of stalls per instruction. Here I have one stall for every add, and that means one stall for every 2 instructions. That is 0.5 per. So this is the CPI for operand forwarding and without operand forwarding. Let me know if there is any query here.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, if you see the third instruction while loading, the instruction decoding is just after the EX stage. Like if we can decode the instruction while the adding instruction is in the EX stage, then we can decode the instruction for add also. Why should we wait for until memory stage? Like
Now, I am not able to understand. You are talking about which instruction?
if you see the third instruction, which is load,
Load. Okay.
the instruction decoding is happening after EX, sir.
Not after EX. At the same cycle, whenever the first one is doing EX, then I am doing the ID.
With the EX of add instruction.
Yes.
See, in the same way, we can decode the instruction for decode it for add instruction while it is in EX stage, right? Why should we wait for one stage? Instruction
No,
fetch is in
you
stage.
you are talking about this ID, right? This ID can happen here, no problem. It's a small mistake. Even if I am putting the ID of add here, this should be a stall. Whether is that the question that you asked?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why can't we keep it there? That is
Yes,
my
yes.
question.
This is clear. That means the EX, there is a small.
Wait for one cycle, sir. Then why should we wait for one cycle?
No, we are not waiting. We are not waiting. Whatever you do early, I cannot complete EX there. Now, if this is the case, I can fetch IF here. Okay, but I cannot do ID here. This will be a stall because I am stalling means I am continuing in the ID stage. See, these two stages would be your ID now. For add instruction, it will continue in ID stage for clock cycle 3 and clock cycle 4. My EX is delayed till clock cycle 5. That means I have to continue in whatever stage it is. So when add instruction is busy in ID, load instruction, the one that is coming after that, it cannot start my ID stage. So the ID will happen only. This is correct.
Yes, sir.
And this can be ID and this can be a stall.
Yes, sir.
So the stall will come down in the vertical manner. And here also the stall will come down vertically. But the final values, that is the time at which the write back happens, remain same.
Yes, sir.
Is the doubt clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So you cannot have two instructions performing the same operation at same time. No two instructions can be in ID stage at the same time. Any other query, anyone? Let us now move to the branch prediction question. Consider the last 16 outcomes of a single static branch. So I'm talking about a branch instruction which may be inside a loop, and this branch instruction happens 16 times in the program. So you have a for loop, and within that you are writing some if condition, if A greater than B. So the same branch instruction would be visited 16 times as the for loop is going to execute. So consider the last 16 outcomes of a single static branch. T means branch is taken, and N means branch is not taken. That means this is the oldest one. First time when I execute, the branch was taken. Next time also taken. Third time not taken, then taken, not taken. So this is the outcome of this branch instruction when it was executed for 16 times. Now I am using a branch predictor of 1-2 type. So 1-2 type, I told you in the last class, 1-2 type means I look at the last one occurrence of the branch and I'm using a 2-bit predictor automata. Since there is only one branch in the program, I am going to index into the BHT. So I'm not going to index with the PC program counter. I'm going to index only with the outcome of the last branch. Hence, only last branch outcome is used to index into BHT. And now I am asking how many mispredictions are there and which of the branches this equal should be mispredicted. So I have to fill up a table with 16 rows and every iteration what it happened. I'm using a 2-bit automata. So this is a 2-bit automata, and initially it is going to start like this. So the table has only 2 entries. So it's a 1-2 type table. So 1-2 type means I am going to index into the table. The table is basically having two rows. This is the first row. This is the second row. So when the last outcome was not taken, then I refer to this. When the last branch occurrence was really taken, I go for this. Or if I draw the branch in such a way that this is the branch history table, this is for 0 entry and this is for 1 entry. So, or this is called basically N and T. So if the last outcome, I will store the values like this. If my last branch is not taken, last time when I encountered this branch, it was actually not taken, then I have to refer into this entry. If the entry is 0, 0, that means I am predicting as branch is not taken. And if my last branch occurrence was taken, then I should refer to this entry. So basically, this one will tell you how many last previous iterations I have referred. And the value inside that, this is a 2-bit automata. And 2-bit automata is driven by this. And the value will tell, as long as the value is 0, 0 and 0, 1, my prediction is going to be not taken. It's predict not taken and predict not taken. When my value is 1, 0 or 1, 1, that is upper side, then my prediction is going to be taken. Now with this, I have to predict and I have to see what is the actual outcome. So initially, so the branch history table, which has only 2 entries. One is the entry for last outcome not taken. Second is the entry for last outcome taken. So this is the way how I am going to represent. And the by default condition is like this, which I mentioned in the last lecture. Okay, what is the by default condition? So 0, 0 and 1, 1. So what does 0, 0 means? If I am going to refer to this entry, the meaning is I am going to predict as not taken. Now let us consider. Initially, there is no last outcome. I am going for the very first time. And as mentioned in the last lecture class, my initial discussion is always branches not taken. Then I refer to this. What does 0, 0 indicate? So when this value is t, I refer to the second one. When this value is n, I refer to the first one. So when 0, 0 means my prediction is not taken. But what actually happened? My first branch was actually taken. So this is a misprediction or not? Yes, this is a misprediction. So the branch predictor predicted that the branch will not happen, not taken, but actual outcome was taken. Now, if you look at the finite automata, what is the finite automata telling? When you are in 0, 0, you are predicting it as not taken, but actually the branch was taken. What happens? You will change the state to 0, 1. So this entry will become 0, 1 / 1, 1. You have to be very careful with this. If you are not able to understand this, you cannot solve it well. You look at this finite automata, it's a 2-bit automata. I referred this entry. Since I referred that entry, after knowing what is the real outcome of the branch, this entry, whatever I referred, that is subjected to a change. So here my entry was 0, 0. Since entry was 0, 0, my prediction was not taken. And actual outcome was taken. So there is a misprediction. So what happens when you are in 0, 0, the actual outcome is taken, I change my state to 0, 1. So my entry in the table will become 0, 1. So this is what you have. So serial number 2, what happens? What is the last outcome? Last outcome was taken. So this will get copied to this. So my last outcome was taken. Now, since the last outcome was taken, next time when I reiterate, I am going to refer to this. Like what I told. If it is n, you refer to the first entry. If it is t, you refer to the second entry. This is 1, 1. What does 1, 1 indicate? 1, 1 indicate I am going to tell that branch is taken. My prediction is taken. So branch predictor will tell the branch is going to take. Accordingly, I fetch the corresponding instruction from the target and then do. But what actually happened? The actual outcome was the branch was taken. So here the prediction is correct, not mispredicted. So this column is all about misprediction. So when you are in 1, 1 and you predict it as taken and actual also is taken, then I continue in that 1, 1 stage. So the updated value of the branch history table is 0, 1, 1 itself. And 3, what happens? The last outcome is t. So I am going for t here. So the third time when I refer last was taken, so I refer to this. My prediction is taken. But what was the actual outcome? Actual outcome was n. So this time it's a misprediction. When you are in 1, 1 and the actual outcome is not taken, then I move the state to 1, 0. So whatever entry I referred only, that is going to change. First entry is not changing because I referred only this one, that will become 1, 0. Like that, if you continue, you will get this something similar to this. So these are the actual outcomes of the branch. And then you can see wherever I put the red mark, that is entry. So since the last outcome was n, I refer to this. It is n. And this is same as what is being given. This row is same as what is given in the question, whether branch was taken or not. So you can see in some places there is no misprediction given by the green column. And in some places you can see there is a prediction. So I request you to work it out because it takes time. So this is basically a 1-2 type predictor. Now similarly, if you are going to have 2-2 type predictor, what I'll do? I am going to check into the outcome of the last 2 branches. So how will my branch predictor table looks like? My branch predictor table looks like 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1. Or this is the condition. Let me make it more clear with that. Let me. Okay, this is 1-2 table. Okay. So if it is a 2-2 table, I use a 2-bit automata, that is the right side, same like this. The entries will be 2 bits, but there will be 4 entries because last 2 outcomes of the branch. Last 2 outcomes of the branch can be NN. Both the last previous 2 iterations are not taken. NT, this is the latest one. This is the oldest one. It can be TN or it can be TT. So your branch entry can be NN, NT, TN, and TT. And initial condition is 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 1. This is the way how standardized things. So this won't be given in any of the question. This is the initial condition that is being given 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 1. So that is a basic entry. And how are you going to look up initially? Initially, my entry is always NN. So I look into this entry, my predictor is not taken. Like that, it is going to forward. So that is all about 2. Now there can be 2-1 predictors. So what is 2-1 predictor? 2-1 predictor means I look into the last 2 outcomes. That means I have 4 entries, but each of the entries is only a 1-bit automata. So rather than, so the table looks like this: NN, NT, TN, and TT, but the entry is 1-bit automata. So it will be 0/0/1/1. Similarly, I can have 2-3 combination, 3-2 combination. So different entries are possible. So accordingly, you have to work out. So it looks at the last 2 branches, and each of the entry is based upon a 1-bit predictor. So in the question, what we are discussing is 1-2 predictor. I look at the last only 1 outcome. So the last only 1 outcome is required. Had it been 2-2, then these entries in this column, last outcomes, will be either NN, NT, TN, or TT. So if there is any query in this, please let me know. So the question that is asked, number of misprediction. So wherever you see yes, misprediction means the prediction column and the outcome column, the entries are not matching. So prediction not taken, but outcome is taken. So that's a misprediction. Wherever you see green color, the prediction is correct and the actual outcome is correct. So there is no misprediction at all. So you can count out which of them is going to be mispredicted and why. Any questions, please?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So in the case where we are looking for the previous 2 outcomes, so
Yes.
for the transition, we should be having 2 transitions, like one for the previous outcome and one for the previous outcome. And
No. What I refer here is the starting one. I refer at NN. That means I refer only to the first entry, this one. And only this state will change based upon the actual outcome, because it's 2-bit automata. So 0, 0 will move to 0, 0 itself, or it can be to 0, 1.
And
Now,
should be
what
considering
happens if I got the last 2 outcomes? So what happens? Suppose if the first entry was taken, then this will become the second entry will be NT. Because initially I start with NN, this will go out and a new one will enter here. Suppose the second one also was taken, then the third entry would be TT. Now here it is n, so it becomes Tn. So I need to look in where should I index into the table. My table has four entries and I have to index into one of them. Can you ask the doubt? If it is not clear, you can ask again.
My doubt was in filling the third column. Like we have a transition where from some state to another state. So for
Yes.
that transition, should we be considering the previous two, both of them, like the two transitions for the DFA? We were using the transitions like in the first case, it is moving from 00 to 01. So
Yes.
we were depending only on the last outcome. But since we
Yeah,
are
we're depending
considering
on the
two
last
such
outcome. So no, the transition is only based upon what happened now. There are not two transition. So this is moving to this, means based upon the finite state automata, what will be telling 00 I move to 01. All other entries remain. So what we do here is the updated table. There won't be two transitions, only one transition as given by the diagram. So if you look at the diagram, this is the diagram that is being given. Whatever you see in the diagram, based on that only the transitions will happen. So even if your state is 00, what is the current outcome? The current outcome is the edges of the final automata. Based on current outcome, you will move to one of the states.
Okay, sir. Sir, so then what is the use of considering previous two outcomes? Like,
but then I know here I am referring in 1-2 type. So I have only two entries, right? But if it is going to be a 2-2 type, out of the 4 entries, I'll refer one. So all the entries are not getting updated. So so in this case, at every time, my correction happen in one of the two. In the 2-2 case, the correction of the states, the state transition happens only in one of the 4.
okay,
So the
sir.
more number of previous branches I take, I will restrict to only certain entries in the table. I'm not trying to update the table quickly.
Yes, sir.
Which is going to be more accurate.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Query. So this is the heart of the branch prediction. A lot of hardware companies still work on it. Even Intel, AMD, they have this branch predictor. Whenever you have branch instructions, you have a table similar to this and a finite automata, which is used in order to populate this.
Sir?
Yes.
What is the logic behind the initial this thing? So like you filled with 00/11.
Yeah.
What is the logic behind that? Like if I had a 3-2, then how to set the initial?
So always the logic will be your initial entries would be 00s and 11s only. That is the basic logic that has been used in branch predictors. To initialize with either you initialize with this or you initialize with this. So generally in 2-2 type, this is the standard logic. You have to understand this. So if these are the entries, I'll be very concrete. Means I am not. So this means when the state is NN and NT, my prediction is 00. And these two, my prediction is 11. So it's a clear, strong prediction to start with initially. So generally it will be given. If at all a question comes, it should be given. If it is not given, this is the default case.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
So suppose it is a 1-bit predictor. Let's say if it is going to be 2-1 predictor, then my entries would be like this: NN, NT, TN, and TT, because it is 2-4 combination. But it is a finite bit automata, so it will be 0/0/1/1. This is for 2-2. For 2-2, this is the initial. For 2-1, this is the initial. And how will a 1-1 look like? 1-1 will have only 2 entries, N and T, and this is the 1-1 entry. Only 2 entries. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Anyone has any query? I'll be very happy to stay back and then clarify.
Sir, I could not understand this figure of 2-bit automata.
You were there in the last class?
Yes, sir. I was there, but I could not understand it properly.
Did you go through the videos after that? How the 2-bit automata has been predicted?
Yes, sir. As I have a doubt, like in this oval sheet, we have written the predict taken, and we have also shown that if we are predicting is taken, then it go to this state. So how these two taken are different?
No. One is a strong. I strongly suppose you are asking me, will it rain today? I am telling 100% it will rain. That is called predict taken 1-1. I am telling almost 80% there will be rain. That is, but still I am telling there will be rain. That is called 1-0. Okay. The other two is just like the reverse, strongly telling and weakly telling. But whether it is strong or weak, as far as the branch is concerned, I have only two choices. Should I bring from follow through instruction or should I bring from a target instruction? So there can be multiple states, and based upon the state. So what happens if I am in this state and my prediction, let's see, if I am in this state and my prediction goes wrong, then I switch my prediction. But if I am this state, if my prediction happens to be wrong, then I am not going to the downside. I am still going to another state. There also, if someone consult me, still my prediction is taken. So two successive mispredictions only will lead me to a change in prediction. Suppose if it's a 3-bit automata, then it should be 4 successive mispredictions. So 3-bit automata looks like this. This is 111, 110, then 101 and 100. And this is going to be 000, 001, 010 and 011. So this is the transitions. So 4 successive mispredictions, then only I move from lower to upper. There are no connections between here and here. So you can look into how a 3-bit automata, branch automata works like. So the idea is just by one misprediction, I should not change my mind. I should wait for as many number of times margin of error probability. So 2-bit automata is not quickly changing its prediction logic as frequently as a 1-bit automata.
Yes, sir.
So kindly refer to the NPTEL video to get more clarity, because then you can focus only on that portion. And if still there is a doubt, feel free to reach out to me.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Any doubt? Was the tutorial session like this useful? Should I plan like this in future also, or you will be able to manage if I give the questions alone?
It was useful, sir.
Yes, sir. It was useful.
Okay. So I will float the questions like this. It would be better if you try to solve it from your end and then come to lecture. It would be more useful. But there are no slides for it. So no slides will be uploaded. Whoever is doing the recording, they can do it. And because it's all a true or false, I just put tick and all, it won't make any sense. So I request students to come to the tutorial session if you really wanted to attend. Anything else? Anyone? Any query? And if you are back in campus, I know that some students are back in campus. Any query, you can even meet me in my office. No problem. You can drop a mail and fix up a time, and then you can come and meet me. My room number is 201.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, from the next time, it would be a bit better if it is possible to upload it a bit earlier so that we can solve.
Yeah. We'll do that. We'll do that.
Yeah.
So I was busy yesterday in the hostel because first years are coming today. And so how many of you are from Kameng hostel? Do we have anyone in Kameng? Somebody who is back? I was little busy yesterday. From the next time onwards, I'll post it. So for exam, it's been scheduled this Saturday. Topics covered up to tomorrow would be there. Okay, that's all. If at all any query, you please ask, or else I will end the class. Okay, then I am stopping the class. Thank you.